It's late at night, and I'm standing in my living room, my heart hammering against my ribs as Jason, my nephew, sways in front of me, drunk and wild-eyed, a crowbar dangling from his hand. The shattered glass from our front window glints on the carpet, a jagged reminder of how far this has gone. My son Ethan is behind me, his voice steady but trembling with fury as he yells, "It was never yours! Get out!" My husband Mark grips a baseball bat, his knuckles white, and slams it against the wall with a crack that makes Jason flinch. I'm on the phone with 911, my voice shaking so bad I can barely get the words out. "Someone broke in. My son's in danger. Please hurry." Jason staggers forward, slurring, "They promised it to me." And in that moment, I know this isn't just about him. It's my parents, Linda and Richard, pulling the strings, sending him to destroy us. The air is thick with fear and betrayal, and all I can think is how we got here, how a high school graduation turned into this nightmare. My name's Anna Miller. I'm 42, a mom of two, a part-time accountant who spent years keeping my head down, balancing books and family while my own parents treated me like a footnote. I grew up watching them shower my older brother Tom with praise, money, and second chances, while I got lectures about making do. My kids, Ethan 18 and Lily 15, mean everything to me. Ethan's the hard worker, the dreamer, the kid who stayed up late cramming for AP exams and hauled boxes at a warehouse on weekends to save for college. Mark, my husband, is my rock, 44, an auto engineer with a quiet strength I lean on more than I admit. We've built a solid life, but my parents? They've always seen us as the backup plan, the ones who'd bend when they needed something for Tom and his son Jason. It all started 3 months ago, at Ethan's high school graduation dinner. We'd saved up to book a private room at a steakhouse. Dark wood walls, dim lights, the kind of place that smells like money and grilled meat. I wanted it to be special, a night to celebrate Ethan's acceptance to his dream school, a state university with a killer engineering program. He'd earned it, every damn bit of it, and I thought, stupidly, that my parents might finally see that. We were all there. Me, Mark, Ethan, Lily, my parents Linda and Richard, even Tom and Jason, who showed up late and sullen. The waiter had just set down our drinks, wine for me, beer for Mark, soda for the kids, when my mom stood up, her pearls glinting under the chandelier. She tapped her glass with a fork, a smug little smile on her face, and I felt a prickle of unease. "We have an announcement," she said, her voice loud and syrupy. "We've decided Ethan's college fund is going to Jason instead. He needs it more." The room went dead silent. My fork slipped from my hand, clattering onto my plate with a sharp metallic ring that echoed in the stillness. Ethan's face drained of color, his hazel eyes wide with shock, his mouth parting like he couldn't find air. Lily frowned, glancing between us, her brows knitting together in confusion, her small hand clutching her soda glass. Mark's grip tightened on his beer, his jaw clenching so hard I could hear his teeth grind, a low, angry sound that matched the storm brewing in his dark eyes. I felt heat flood my chest, a mix of disbelief and rage bubbling up so fast I couldn't breathe, my throat tightening as if someone had wrapped a fist around it. "What?" I managed, my voice barely a whisper, trembling with the weight of what I'd just heard. The steakhouse's warm glow, flickering candles, polished wood, the hum of soft jazz, felt suffocating now, like the walls were closing in. My mom stood there, her pearls gleaming under the chandelier, her smile wide and self-satisfied, like she'd just unveiled some grand gift. My dad nodded beside her, his gray hair catching the light, his expression calm and approving, as if this was the most logical thing in the world. Across the table, Jason slouched in his chair, his hoodie pulled low over his forehead, a smirk tugging at his lips. Tom, my brother, sat next to him, avoiding my gaze, his fingers fidgeting with a napkin. The waiter, a lanky guy named Pete, who'd been hovering nearby, froze mid-step, a pitcher of water in his hands, his eyes darting between us like he'd stumbled into a war zone. "What did you just say?" I asked again, louder this time, my voice cutting through the silence like a blade. My hands trembled on the table, the linen napkin crumpling under my grip. My mom tilted her head, her smile faltering just a fraction. "Anna, don't overreact," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "Jason's had a tough time. Drugs, the wrong crowd. This money will give him a fresh start. Ethan's fine, he can figure something out." My dad chimed in, his voice gruff. "It's what's best for the family. Tom's been struggling as a single dad. We need to support them." I looked at Ethan, my chest aching as I saw the devastation in his eyes. He'd worked so hard, late nights studying, summers unloading trucks, all for that engineering degree he'd dreamed of since he was 12. And now this? I turned to Jason, who met my stare with that smug little grin, his hands stuffed in his pockets like he didn't care. Tom finally glanced up, his face pale, but he said nothing. Just let our parents steamroll us. Lily whispered, "Mom, what's happening?" Her voice small and scared, and I reached for her hand under the table, squeezing it tight to steady myself as much as her. Mark set his beer down with a deliberate thud, the glass rattling against the wood. He leaned back, crossing his arms, and let out a low, bitter chuckle that made my mom blink. "That's funny," he said, his voice calm but edged with steel, "because we moved it last month." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. My mom's smile vanished, her eyes narrowing. "What?" she snapped, her voice rising an octave. My dad's head jerked toward Mark, his calm facade cracking. "What do you mean, moved it?" he demanded, his hands flattening on the table. Mark grinned, slow and dangerous, the kind of smile that said he'd been waiting for this. "Yeah, we saw this coming a mile away. Ethan's college fund? It's locked up, out of your hands. Done." The room erupted. My mom's face flushed crimson, her pearls bouncing as she leaned forward, shrieking, "You had no right. That money was ours to decide." My dad slammed his fist down, the silverware jumping, his voice booming. "You can't do that. It's for family." I stood up, my chair scraping loud against the floor, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. "Ethan is family," I shouted, my voice raw. "That fund was his. You had no say in it." My mom spun on me, her finger jabbing the air. "You're selfish, Anna. Jason needs this. Tom's been through hell and you're ruining it." I laughed, a harsh, broken sound that startled even me. "Ruining it? You mean like when Jason stole my necklace to pawn it? Or when he got arrested for drunk driving and you paid his bail? Or when he totaled Tom's car and you bought him a new one?" My dad growled, "That's different. He's struggling." I stepped closer, my hands shaking with fury. "And I'm a mother watching you steal my son's future on the day he's supposed to celebrate. You don't get to play martyr here." Ethan stood then, his chair tipping back with a crash. His face was pale, but his eyes burned with something fierce. "You know what?" he said, his voice trembling but strong. "I don't need your money. I don't need you in my life." He turned to me, his jaw tight. "Mom, can we go?" Mark was already up, his hand on Ethan's shoulder, his voice steady. "Let's get out of here. We don't owe them shit." Lily grabbed her bag, her eyes wide and teary, and I snatched my purse, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold it. I looked at my parents, my voice low and final. "This was your last chance. You've shown who you are and we're done." We walked out, my mom's screams chasing us. "Ungrateful! You're tearing this family apart!" But I didn't look back. Ethan's shoulders were hunched, his breaths quick and shallow, and I could feel the hurt radiating off him. Lily clung to my arm, whispering, "They can't do that, right?" I squeezed her hand, my throat tight. "No, baby, they can't." Pete, the waiter, caught my eye as we passed, his face a mix of shock and sympathy. Sorry about that," he mumbled, setting the pitcher down. I nodded, too numb to reply, and we pushed through the heavy doors into the cool March night. The drive home was quiet, the hum of the car the only sound as we wound through suburban streets. Ethan stared out the window, his reflection pale in the glass, and I kept stealing glances at him, guilt and anger twisting in my gut. Mark's hands gripped the wheel, his silence loud with the same fury I felt. Lily broke it first, her voice small from the back seat. "Why do they hate us, Mom?" I turned, my heart breaking at her wide, searching eyes. "They don't hate us," I said, though it felt like a lie. They care more about Tom and Jason. Always have." "That's bullshit," Ethan muttered, his voice thick with emotion. He turned to me, his eyes wet. "I worked my ass off, Mom, for years, and they just take it?" I reached for his hand, my own trembling. "They're not taking anything, Ethan. We made sure of that." Mark glanced over, his voice firm. "We saw this coming, bud. Your grandma's been dropping hints for months. Jason needs help. Tom's struggling. We moved the fund to a new account under our names only. They can't touch it." Ethan nodded, slow, but the hurt didn't fade. "Still sucks," he said, looking away. "We thought that was it. A line drawn, a fight won. But my parents weren't done. It started with the calls, voicemails flooding my phone the next day. My mom's voice, shrill and venomous. "How dare you betray us, Anna? You've destroyed this family." My dad's, gruff and cold. "You'll regret this. Mark my words." I listened to them in the kitchen, my coffee growing cold, each word a knife twisting deeper. Then Tom texted 2 days later. "Jason needs that money more than Ethan. You're being selfish." No questions, no "how's Ethan?" Just guilt, like always. I stared at the screen, my stomach churning, and didn't reply. A week later, the real blow came. I was scrubbing dishes, the suds stinging my cracked hands when Mark walked in, his face tight with anger. "They tried to access the fund," he said, slamming his phone on the counter. I dropped the sponge, water splashing onto the floor. "What?" I choked out, my heart racing. "Your parents," he said, his voice low and furious. "They called the bank, pretended to be us, said it was an emergency withdrawal." My knees wobbled, and I gripped the sink, dread flooding me. "Did they get it?" Mark shook his head. "No, Clara caught it." Clara Evans, my high school friend, now a teller at our bank. I'd known her since we were 16, sneaking cigarettes behind the gym. She was sharp, loyal, the kind of person who'd spot a lie a mile away. I grabbed my phone, dialed her, my fingers shaking. She answered fast, her voice tense. "Anna, thank God you called. Your mom, she tried to pull money from Ethan's old account, faked your voice, said it was for a family crisis. I flagged it, called Mark to check." I sank into a chair, my breath shallow. "She did what?" Clara sighed. "Yeah, it was blatant. I locked it down, but you need to watch your back." "Thanks, Clara," I said, my voice cracking. "I owe you." She laughed, dry. "Just buy me a beer sometime. This family drama's wild." I hung up, my hands trembling, and Mark sat across from me, his eyes dark. "They're not stopping," he said. I nodded, fear and fury warring inside me. "We need help," I said. "Legal help." Mark pulled out his phone. "I know a guy, Derek Hayes, lawyer. He's a shark. Owes me a favor from a car job last year." I exhaled, shaky. "Call him." Derek met us the next day at a diner. Greasy tables, the smell of burnt coffee thick in the air. He was 38, lean, with sharp gray eyes and a grin that said he lived for fights like this. I spilled everything. The dinner, the fund, the bank attempt. He leaned back, flipping through our bank statements, his pen tapping the table. "They've got no case," he said, his voice smooth. "You set up the fund, funded it. Their names aren't on it. But they'll try something. People like this always do." I swallowed, my stomach knotting. "What if they lie?" Derek smirked. "Let 'em. I'll bury 'em." He was right. They tried something. 3 days later, I found an envelope on our doorstep, thick and official. My hands shook as I tore it open, Mark hovering behind me. "They're suing us," I whispered, scanning the legal jargon, claiming they co-funded it, that we stole it. Mark grabbed the papers, his jaw tight. "This is insane," he muttered. $2,000 from when Ethan was a baby? They're saying that gives them rights?" I called Derek, my voice shrill. "They've got a receipt, $2,000 from 15 years ago." He laughed, cold. "That's their play? I'll shred it. Get me everything. Every deposit, every transfer." We spent days digging. Bank records, pay stubs, every penny we'd saved for Ethan. Clara faxed us the old account logs, her note scrawled on top. "Your mom's nuts." Then my parents dropped their bomb. At the first lawyer meeting, a sterile office, fluorescent lights buzzing, they sat across from us, smug as hell, their lawyer flashing a faded receipt. $2,000, he said. "Proof of contribution." My mom smiled, sweet and venomous. Without that, they'd have nothing. I nearly laughed, my voice shaking. $2,000? You think that controls $50,000? Mark stayed calm, his hand on mine. "So you gave a gift once and now you own it?" My dad nodded, firm. "Exactly." Derek leaned forward, his eyes glinting. "This receipt, Richard's signature, doesn't match his current one. Care to explain?" Their lawyer faltered, my mom's smile slipping. "We'll see what the court says," she snapped. I sat there, my heart pounding, fear and hope tangled tight. They were liars, but they were good at it. I sat there in that sterile lawyer's office, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, my heart pounding as Derek called out the fake signature on my parents' precious $2,000 receipt. My mom's smug smile slipped, her eyes darting to their lawyer, a sweaty guy in a cheap suit who stammered something about clerical errors. My dad's face hardened, his hands clenching into fists on the table, but he didn't say a word. Mark squeezed my hand under the table, his steady grip the only thing keeping me from screaming. I could feel the heat in my cheeks, a mix of fury and hope warring inside me. They'd lied, and we'd caught them, but I knew they wouldn't stop. "We'll see what the court says," my mom snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, and I just stared at her, wondering how the woman who'd raised me could turn into this. We left the meeting with Derek's assurance ringing in my ears. "They've got nothing, Anna. We'll win this." But the fear stayed, a cold knot in my gut. Back home, I couldn't sit still. I paced the kitchen, the hardwood cool under my bare feet, my mind racing. Ethan was upstairs, blasting music through his headphones, trying to drown out the mess. Lily sat at the table, her algebra homework forgotten, her voice small. "Are they going to take Ethan's college away, Mom?" I stopped, my chest tightening at the worry in her brown eyes. "No, sweetie," I said, forcing a smile. "We won't let them." But as I turned away, my hands shook. I wasn't sure I believed it myself. 3 days later, I got a call from Maggie Torres, my best friend since college. She's a freelance journalist, 43, loud, with a knack for digging up dirt. I'd texted her about the lawsuit in a panic, and she'd promised to look into my parents. "Anna, you sitting down?" she asked, her voice crackling with excitement. I gripped the phone, my breath catching. "Yeah, what'd you find?" She laughed, sharp and triumphant. "Your folks? They've been skimming from a family charity fund, $20,000 over 10 years, funneled to Tom and Jason. I've got bank records, receipts, the works." My knees buckled, and I sank onto the couch, disbelief washing over me. "You're kidding." "Nope," she said, and I could hear her grin. "They thought they were slick, but I'm better. Use this. It'll shut 'em up." I hung up, my hands trembling with a mix of shock and power. Mark walked in, saw my face, and frowned. "What's wrong?" I held up the phone, my voice shaky but fierce. "Maggie found proof. They've been stealing from a charity. We've got them." His eyes widened, then he grinned, slow and dangerous. "Call Derek." I did, my fingers flying over the keys, and when I told him, he laughed so hard I thought he'd choke. "Oh, this is gold," he said. "I'll draft a counterclaim. Threaten to expose them. They'll fold." We sent the warning through Derek the next day, a letter detailing their fraud, with copies of Maggie's evidence attached, and a clear message: drop the suit or we go public. I waited, my stomach in knots, every creak of the house making me jump. 2 days later, Derek called. "They're backing off," he said, his voice smug. "Lawsuits dropped. Your fund's safe." I exhaled, a shaky laugh escaping me, and Mark pulled me into a hug, his arms tight around my shoulders. "We did it," he whispered, and for a moment I let myself believe it was over, but it wasn't. That night, March 12, 2025, everything went to hell. Mark and I were asleep, the house quiet, when a crash jolted me awake. Glass shattering downstairs, sharp and violent. My heart leapt into my throat, and I sat up, my breath ragged. Mark was already moving, grabbing the baseball bat from beside the bed, his face hard with focus. "Stay here," he hissed, but I shook my head, fumbling for my phone. "No way," I whispered, dialing 911 as footsteps thudded below. "Someone's in our house," I told the operator, my voice trembling. "Please hurry." Then I heard Ethan's voice, loud, angry, echoing up the stairs. "Mom! Dad!" Panic shot through me, and Mark bolted for the door, bat in hand. I followed, my bare feet slapping the cold floor, my phone still pressed to my ear. We reached the landing just as Ethan stepped out of his room, his fists clenched, his eyes wide with fear and fury. Downstairs in the living room stood Jason, swaying, drunk, a crowbar dangling from his hand. Broken glass glittered around him, the front window a jagged hole. "Where is it?" he slurred, his voice thick and desperate, his hoodie streaked with dirt. Mark tightened his grip on the bat, stepping forward. "Where's what?" Jason stumbled closer, his eyes wild. "The money! They promised it to me! I deserve it!" Ethan moved beside me, his voice steady despite the shake in his hands. "It was never yours. Get out." My stomach twisted. My parents had sent him, too desperate to fight fair. I gripped the phone, my voice breaking. "Police are coming, Jason. Leave now." He laughed, a broken, bitter sound, and raised the crowbar just enough to make my blood run cold. "You think you can take what's mine?" Mark swung the bat, not at Jason but at the wall beside him, the crack deafening. Jason flinched, stumbling back, his bravado crumbling. "Get the hell out," Mark growled, and Jason hesitated, his gaze darting between us. Then he turned, bolting through the shattered window, his footsteps fading into the night. I sank against the wall, my legs weak, tears burning my eyes as the operator's voice buzzed in my ear. "Ma'am, police are 2 minutes out. Stay safe." Mark dropped the bat, pulling Ethan and me into his arms, his breathing ragged. "You okay?" he asked, and I nodded, though I wasn't sure it was true. The cops arrived fast, lights flashing, radios crackling. They took our statements, photographed the glass, and found Jason 3 blocks away, passed out in an alley with the crowbar still in his hand. He was arrested for attempted burglary, and by sunrise my mom had bailed him out, $5,000 she didn't even blink to pay. Then she called me, her voice dripping with venom. "You've gone too far, Anna. You had him arrested." I stood in my kitchen, the broken window boarded up, my hands shaking with rage. "He broke into our home with a weapon," I said, my voice cold. "That's on you." She went quiet, then whispered, "You'll regret this," and hung up. I believed her. 2 weeks later, Tom reached out. "It's gone too far," he said over the phone, his voice tired. "Mom and Dad are a wreck. Jason's a mess. Meet us, please." I wanted to laugh. Now he cared? But Mark convinced me. "Maybe we end it," he said, his eyes steady. "Get answers." So we went, Sunday afternoon, to my parents' house, a beige split level I'd once called home. It felt like a battlefield now, the air thick with tension as we walked in. My parents sat on the couch, stiff and cold, Linda's face drawn, Richard's eyes fixed on the floor. Tom stood by the fireplace. Jason slumped in an armchair, gaunt and hollow, his usual swagger gone. "Let's get this over with," I said, standing by the door, Mark beside me. Tom sighed. "We all screwed up." Mark scoffed. "We screwed up? Your folks tried to steal from our kid." Tom flinched. "I didn't mean it like that. This isn't what they wanted." I laughed, bitter and loud. "They wanted to rob Ethan blind and use Jason to break into our house. So what didn't they want?" Jason looked up then, his voice hoarse. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," he muttered, his hands shaking. "I thought it was mine." I froze, my heart pounding. "Why?" He swallowed, glancing at my mom, and I saw it, guilt flickering in her eyes. Mark leaned forward, his voice low. "Tell us, Jason. Why'd you think it was yours?" Jason hesitated, then broke. "They told me it was mine all along, that Ethan's fund was for me, that you stole it." My mom flinched, and I spun on her, fury exploding. "You lied to him? You told him my son's money was his?" My dad cut in, sharp. "What does it matter? You had plenty. Jason had nothing. What kind of sister are you?" I stepped forward, my voice shaking with rage. "What kind of parents are you? You've treated me like dirt my whole life, handed Tom everything, and now you expect me to sacrifice Ethan's future for your guilt?" My mom stood, her face red. "We did what we had to." Jason shook his head, his voice cracking. "You lied to me," he whispered, staring at her. "You promised I'd be set." He turned to me, his eyes wet. "I'm sorry." Then he walked out, leaving my parents gaping, their control slipping. "We're done," I said, my voice steady now. "For good." Tom tried to speak, but I held up a hand. "Save it." We left, the door slamming behind us, their shouts fading into nothing. Jason got a job after that, started community college. Guilt or a wake-up call, I don't know. Tom called once, apologized, but I wasn't ready to hear it. Ethan went to his dream school, his fund intact, his head high. My parents? They lost us, lost everything they'd tried to control. They're out there, stewing in their misery, probably plotting still, but I'm free. Here's what I learned. Family isn't blood. It's who fights for you, not against you. My parents chose their game, and it cost them everything. Me? I've got Mark, Ethan, Lily, my real family, and that's enough. Will they try again? Maybe. Will I be ready? You bet. So tell me, what would you do if your family pulled this? Fight or walk away? Let me know below. I'm listening.